murder of Rachel Marin, a man from El Salvador in the country illegally.
There is nothing compassionate about allowing violent criminals into our country.
Intensifying the debate over immigration on both the local and national stage.
We have to start deporting the people who are not here in compliance with American law.
I'm pressing lawmakers and policy experts alike.
Have you had any conversations with lawmakers about potentially drafting legislation like that?
Going in depth on the issue. Thank you for joining us on this week's edition of Fox 45 In Depth. I'm Mikenzie Frost. Each week, we'll be taking a deep dive into the issues that matter most to you. Today, the focus is immigration. Right now, Maryland does not have a uniform policy. Each jurisdiction makes its own decision when it comes to dealing with ICE detainers. Several of them have sanctuary policies, meaning law enforcement is not required to honor detainers. Fox 45 News has found several examples of sex offenders and other convicted criminals in the country illegally being released from custody instead of being handed over to immigration authorities. And last month, Harford County Police announced the arrest of Victor Martinez Hernandez, an El Salvadorian national, in connection to the murder of Rachel Marin. Marin's brother addressed the RNC earlier this week. The death of Harford County mother of 5, Rachel Marin, front and center during the Republican National Committee convention this week.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Marin family from Maryland.
While Maryland is hundreds of miles away from the southern border, immigration becoming an intense conversation following Marin's killing in August 2023. Rachel's brother, Michael, recounting the tragedy to a packed room in Milwaukee.
She went for a walk in one of our family's favorite places. This beautiful trail was to us a safe place where we pushed our babies in strollers, where we walked together as a family, where my wife and I got married, near what would later become the spot where my sister's body was found.
Among the Republicans on hand for the speech, former President Donald Trump. Michael Marin laying blame for his sister's death squarely at the feet of the Biden administration's immigration policies.
Joe Biden and his designated border czar, Kamala Harris, opened our borders to him and others like him, empowering them to victimize the innocent. Yet, to this day, we have not heard from Joe Biden or Kamala Harris.
Michael Marin says neither President Joe Biden or Vice President Kamala Harris have reached out to the family following Rachel's death, but says the former president has.
He wanted to meet with us. He cared. That is leadership.
Rachel Marin's suspected killer, 23-year-old Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez. He was arrested last month in Oklahoma and extradited to Maryland, arriving in restraints, flanked by federal and local law enforcement. Martinez Hernandez now facing first-degree murder and rape charges, accused of the brutal attack of Rachel Marin, accused of being in the United States illegally. The 23-year-old has a history of run-ins with Border Protection. He was apprehended 3 times in less than a month's span from January to February 2023, nearly 6 months before authorities say he killed Rachel Marin. Martinez Hernandez expelled from the United States when he was apprehended in Texas and New Mexico, and then Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, says around February 13th, 2023, Martinez Hernandez successfully entered the United States illegally. His arrest now ends what law enforcement says was an international crime spree.
Victor Hernandez did not come here to make a better life for himself or for his family. He came here to escape the crime he committed in El Salvador. He came here and murdered Rachel.
And police in Los Angeles say he's connected to another attack of a mother and child in March 2023. DNA collected from that attack is how Martinez Hernandez was identified as a suspect in Marin's murder. Back at the RNC convention, the Marin family bolstering Republican criticism about the Biden administration's border policies.
Rachel, a joyful, accomplished athlete and mother of 5, was raped and murdered by a suspected illegal immigrant.
Arrests for illegal border crossings from Mexico dropped 29% in June, the lowest month of Joe Biden's presidency. The plunge in arrests followed a move by President Biden to temporarily suspend asylum. While immigration policy continues to be a political football in Congress, Rachel Marin's murder has put Maryland squarely in the middle of the fight.
Open borders are often portrayed as compassionate and virtuous. But there is nothing compassionate about allowing violent criminals into our country and robbing children of their mother. My sister's death was preventable.
And so far, politicians continue to punt on finding a solution, looking to the next election as a catalyst for change.
Now, Fox 45's Rebecca Pryor has been following the immigration issue for weeks. She was there when ICE officers arrested 2 targets convicted of crimes in Baltimore and Howard counties. She joins us live now in the studio. Rebecca, tell us about the types of offenders ICE says they are trying to arrest.
Well, Mikenzie, I've spent a lot of time speaking with Maryland's ICE Director Matthew Elliston over the last few weeks. According to him, ICE agents are only after individuals who are accused of or oftentimes already convicted of committing violent offenses or sexual assaults. So simply living in the country, according to him, is not enough to be deported, although Elliston says that is a common misconception. Now, on my exclusive ride along with ICE agents back in June, the first person that they arrested was a convicted child sex offender out of Baltimore County. Charging documents say that he repeatedly raped a 14-year-old family member. The second arrest was a convicted drug dealer out of Howard County. Charging documents say that he was caught selling a significant amount of cocaine to an undercover cop. Now, in that case in particular, the individual's wife was present during that arrest. She was also believed to be an undocumented immigrant, but ICE agents did not detain her. Again, that's because Elliston says that that would go against their policies, claiming that ICE is only after, quote unquote, the worst of the worst. It's also important to note that Elliston says his agents have led the nation in sex offender arrests for the last 2 years and are on track to do so again this year.
And Rebecca, those 2 individuals could have been handed over to ICE agents at local detention centers, but in both cases, the detainers were not honored. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Baltimore County and Howard County, they both have these sanctuary policies in place that bar local law enforcement from cooperating with ICE. So even when ICE requests that a convicted criminal be held until they can come pick them up, those jurisdictions will instead release their inmates back into the community. Now, Baltimore County Executive Johnny Olszewski has since changed his policy after it was revealed that child sex offenders were ending up back on the streets. Olszewski now requires at least 48 hours notice to be given before releasing anyone on ICE's list. However, Howard County Executive Calvin Ball, he continues to say no exceptions will be made, no matter the crimes committed. Take a listen to this part of an interview I had with him recently.
I think we have a legislation that's working right now for Howard County.
Child sex offenders, prolific drug dealers, they're being released back into Howard County, your community, as opposed to being turned over to ICE agents because of a law that you're doubling down on. Do you agree that that's how things should be handled in Howard County?
I agree that when people break the law, they should be held accountable. I also agree that the federal enforcement should enforce federal laws. I agree that local law enforcement should enforce local laws.
Now, regardless of those policies, Elliston says that his agents won't stop making arrests. It will simply require more manpower, more tax dollars, and a higher risk to public safety when detainers are dismissed.
All right, Rebecca, thank you so much for that information. And I had my own conversation with ICE Director Matthew Elliston this week about how his agency is working with Maryland leaders.
The idea of letting people out of a jail who have been convicted of crimes and then releasing them back to the community instead of releasing them to ICE, I can't imagine how you could put a political spin on that. It's a criminal justice issue.
We're seeing more and more local leaders come out and say, okay, there's a compromise here. We can work with ICE when it comes to honoring some of these detainers. Where is that coming from?
I think what we've done is change how we work with the local community. So before a detainer, as it says on its face, you'll hold them for 48 hours after they've been ordered released. I've softened that stance here in Maryland with just, hey, as long as you turn them over to us, we'll consider that compliance. We don't want to put you in a position that would infringe on the Maryland Attorney General's guidance. Yeah.
And that's where we're seeing a lot of local leaders point to this, and they say, we can't comply with your request because we might get sued or we might be violating someone's constitutional rights.
And I think we're all in it for the same reason. No matter what your political beliefs are, you don't want the people in your community victimized. And I think working together to come up to a creative solution that falls within the Attorney General's guidance is why we've seen a shift from 71% of Maryland residents living in a sanctuary location to now only 7%.
Is Maryland in the minority here?
Maryland is in the minority. Most of the country works with ICE and works with our detainers. Some states have gone as far as to create state laws mandating cooperation with immigration detainers. I wish that Maryland would go down that same avenue. I would be happy to work with the state legislature and create something that would be a benefit for everybody, so they don't feel that, well, what if, a lot of the contrary opinions saying, well, it becomes a huge dragnet and then everybody who goes into jail ends up getting a detainer and gets deported, where that's not what we do. My big stance on public safety is if you left a victim behind. ICE is in the business of making sure that we don't create more victims.
We recently heard from Governor Wes Moore talk about Maryland policy, this conversation that we're having right now. And he said that because ICE is a federal agency, there's no state law that can be drafted and created to mandate cooperation.
It's not accurate. Florida has a law, Georgia has a law, Texas has a law. Other states have put cooperation into effect and are mandatory. Florida being an easy example, Georgia just put a law into place that makes detainer compliance mandatory.
The legislature meets in January for 90 days. It's the middle of July at this point. Have you had any conversations with lawmakers about potentially drafting legislation like that?
So I have a meeting with the head of the state Senate and the head of the state delegates later this month. So don't know how it's going to go.
Okay.
My fingers are crossed that we'll have a productive conversation.
We've been pressing lawmakers on the state and local levels for answers when it comes to the immigration policy for weeks. Coming up after the break, we'll take a closer look at their conflicting ideas for how to move forward. And as we head to break, we're taking a look at some of today's headlines.
ICE agents relentlessly searching for 25-year-old Hassim Gumbo, the Chad national, convicted in Howard County for accessory after the fact of murder in the first degree. And before that, unlawful possession of a firearm and theft in Montgomery County.
This is a very dangerous person that is now running the streets.
But this week, ICE announcing a capture finally made in this case.
In the quiet countryside of Carroll County, residents are being anything but quiet about the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project. Right now, you see rows and rows of trees, but Meyer says if this transmission line is built and cuts through his property, it could wipe out about a third of them.
Ahead of his big speech, Trump stopping by a private RNC event.
Now, this has been our best campaign, and then I got shot.
Seen all week bandaged on his right ear, a reminder of what almost happened.
You appreciate God even more.
Republican delegates gathered in Milwaukee, eager to hear what he has to say.
Some Republican Maryland state lawmakers are calling on Wes Moore to take a stronger stance on the immigration issue. Last month, the Maryland Joint Republican Caucus asked the governor to roll back public policies that made Maryland a sanctuary state. And in a letter, more than a dozen Republican lawmakers asked the governor to give clear instructions when it comes to contacting ICE. They say these are issues that need to be addressed at the state level now, rather than wait on Congress to act.
So it's so important that we protect the community and make sure these criminals are not released, but are indeed held, apprehended by ICE, and deported.
We can't pass the buck. Our citizens, they want action. Our citizens want accountability. And I can't look at my constituents in the face and say it's not my problem. This is our problem.
Now, Governor Wes Moore has largely tried to stay out of the immigration policy conversation, but during an interview with political commentator Armstrong Williams, the governor made it clear he does not believe Maryland can implement a statewide policy to work with ICE. But our investigation found some states do have policies in place.
Governor Wes Moore making his case about a statewide ICE cooperation policy.
States do not have either the resources or, frankly, the legal jurisdiction to be able to take on these issues by ourselves.
Instead of a blanket plan, there's a patchwork of policies with local leaders making the decisions. Harford and Frederick counties work with ICE to hand over people who are alleged to be in the country illegally. Baltimore and Montgomery counties coming to a compromise with ICE, now giving the federal agency a heads up with someone with a detainer is said to be released from a detention facility following a criminal conviction.
There is no state law that you can do for ICE.
That was the governor during a town hall with political commentator Armstrong Williams. And right now, many leaders point to this 2017 opinion from the Maryland Attorney General's office, telling leaders complying with ICE detainers is voluntary and also warning of possible litigation if someone is held beyond his or her release date without a judicial warrant or probable cause.
The idea that somehow the state has an ICE policy, there's nowhere that a state has an ICE policy, and frankly, for anyone who's talking about what should the state do, you know, I tell people they're either politically motivated or they're just deeply uninformed.
But that's not the case everywhere. Across the country, there are states with ICE policies in place. According to the Immigration Legal Resource Center, several states do have laws mandating some participation in immigration enforcement. Florida, Texas, West Virginia, Iowa require local law enforcement to be involved in deporting people. Others, like Montana, Arizona, Kansas, and Georgia, mandate some participation in ICE policies. On the flip side, the Federation for American Immigration Reform says 11 states have sanctuary state policies: California, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, and Washington, D.C., just to name a few. Some policies have been challenged in court. But contrary to what Governor Wes Moore claims, there are some states ordering cooperation with ICE for migrants in the United States illegally.
Now, we just heard from that Governor Wes Moore looking to Washington for answers when it comes to immigration policy. Congress historically has stalled on enacting such plans. I spoke with Maryland's lone Republican member of Congress, Representative Andy Harris, yesterday. Congressman Harris is attending the RNC, and I asked him about the apparent stalemate on Capitol Hill when it comes to immigration. When you talk about how there needs to be a president in the White House who will address this immigration system, what exactly do you believe that, let's say, a Trump administration would be able to do that hasn't been done so far?
Well, look, the problem is on the very first few days of the Biden administration, he literally wrote dozens of executive orders that reversed the Trump border policies and that have resulted in at least 10 million people coming into this country illegally. The fact of the matter is, all the president has to do is reverse the executive orders of Joe Biden, restore the policies of the Trump administration.
What specific executive actions did President Biden take that you would like to see President Trump reverse?
Well, the most important one is the Remain in Mexico policy. The fact of the matter is our law is pretty simple. If you're coming to claim asylum in the United States, as at least 6 million of the people who've crossed the border have come in to claim asylum, you're supposed to wait in the country from which you came until that asylum claim is adjudicated in the immigration court.
What do you say to people who are trying to use the asylum process to escape something that perhaps would be too dangerous to stay in that country until their claim is adjudicated?
Well, again, if they want to come to America, we have to follow America's law. America's law says if you come to claim asylum, you have to stay in the country in which you are crossing into America until your claim is adjudicated. That's the American law. If they don't like it, I got to tell you, find another country.
So what's going on the Hill in terms of preventing some of this action or progress for immigration policy reform?
Remember, when that deal was brought back up a few months ago, even Senator Langford, who engineered that deal, voted against bringing it up. Because I think the more people looked at the, quote, bipartisan deal, which had very rare Republican support. And in Washington, if one or two Republicans agree to something, all of a sudden it's a bipartisan deal. The fact of the matter is it was a bad deal. It would have allowed well over 1.5 million people into this country who don't belong here every single year.
So do you think Congress will ever take action on immigration laws?
No, honestly, I don't think they will, because I think the Democrats in the Senate, I think the Democrats proved by their action on what we call the SAVE Act, which was an act we passed out of the House last week, just very simply to say, if you vote in a federal election, you have to prove that you're a citizen, prove that you actually have the right to vote in that election. Broadly rejected by Democrats.
Now, Congressman Harris making it clear he does not believe that Congress will take action on immigration laws, using that as a way to continue to campaign for former President Donald Trump. We should note that Donald Trump lost Maryland in the 2020 election by more than 30 percentage points, but in Congressman Harris's district, Trump remains popular. And while lawmakers at the state and federal level continue to debate immigration policy, a question remains: can states implement policies alone? I spoke with a senior fellow at the Migration Policy Institute about constitutional concerns about local ICE policies.
This is one of the most contested areas in immigration policy, because we generally think that immigration is national policy. It's like foreign policy. How can we have 50 different state foreign policies? But at the same time, we have to recognize, though policy on immigration is made at the federal level, people live in states and localities. We have a peculiar federal structure in which the authority over law enforcement is divided. That's why you see this controversy over time. So to the extent that we can make these policies as uniform as policy, would be good for the national interest.
But is it possible for states to have a blanket, uniform policy when it comes to working with ICE?
States have tried, but they have been contested. Patchwork is really the right word, but patchwork is almost the definition of our federal structure. So the best I think one can do is Congress can make general policies. If we force localities over a national policy, then they will be within their right to sue the federal government. I think it would be perfectly fine for the president to call law enforcement agencies to a White House meeting. Look, we know that this is contested territory, but we have a national problem here. And how do we agree to a national solution to a national problem which does not lead to us litigating against each other all the time?
Let's say state lawmakers came together and crafted a policy that was kind of that consensus like you were talking about, and say, here's the top priorities of the people that we would be okay with honoring ICE detainers. If something like that were to happen, would that hold up in court if a law were to be passed in the state house at the local level?
I think it would, if it was done as a matter of consensus, and if it was seen that people had a lot of say in how this consensus was built. I think that would hold much more than if it was just imposed from the top.
Next week, Maryland's ICE Director Matthew Elliston is meeting with House Speaker Adrian Jones and Senate President Bill Ferguson. I reached out to Jones and Ferguson's office to find out if that meeting would focus on possible policy plans for the next legislative session. A spokesperson for Speaker Jones simply says the meeting is on the books and was scheduled at Elliston's request. We'll follow up with the leaders after that meeting to find out more information. And we also reached out to CASA Maryland, an immigrants' rights organization, to discuss the current policies. When we finalize an interview, we'll bring that to you. We want to hear from you. Do you think there should be a uniform state immigration policy? Stay with us. We'll take a look at the results and comments from our viewers after the break. We asked if you think there should be a uniform state immigration policy, and so far, 97% of voters say yes. We brought a similar question to former governor and current Senate candidate Larry Hogan last month, and he had a similar answer.
Several jurisdictions have made the decision not to notify them. It's just outrageous and unacceptable. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen. And I think the federal government needs to force these local governments to follow federal law.
Meanwhile, Democratic Senate candidate Angela Alsobrooke sat down with our sister station in Washington, D.C. She says she supports immigration policy reform on the federal level, but also wants to help immigrants remain here legally.
I'm in favor of immigration reform, not only at the border, but making sure that we create a pathway towards citizenship for those who are in our country. I've long supported the Dreamers.
Now, our viewers at home are weighing in on the question as well on social media. Let's take a look at what some people are saying here. Let's take a look at some of these responses here. Matt Calvin says this is a federal issue. It should not be in the hands of the state. If the federal government would enforce the immigration laws, states wouldn't have to. Another person says it doesn't make a difference what we think. Of course, with a path to citizenship is another response from Michael Mayer there. And if you don't come here legally, you don't get in. All right, thank you so much for joining me for this week's edition of Fox 45 News in Depth. Fox 45 News at 6 is next, and here's what we can expect. A key decision in the case against the man accused of killing Baltimore tech executive Pavel Lapierre, why a judge is denying a motion to strike certain evidence from trial. And an update on the investigation into former President Trump's assassination attempt, why investigators now say an online profile attributed to the shooter is fake.